The great hall of Thornwood Pack had never felt so cold. Seraphina stood at its center, her white hair catching the torchlight like strands of moon silk, her pale skin almost luminous against the dark wooden walls that surrounded her. 300 wolves had gathered for what should have been the most sacred ceremony of her life. 300 pairs of eyes watched her now, and in every gaze she found the same thing she had seen since childhood. Fear, disgust, revulsion. She kept her spine straight. She had learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty, and she would not give them the satisfaction. Not today. Not on the day they had chosen to destroy whatever small hope she had left. High Alpha Malachar sat upon his throne of carved oak and iron, his silver hair pulled back from a face that had once been handsome, but had long since turned cruel. He was watching her with an expression she could not read, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight like chips of obsidian. Beside him stood Theron, the beta male who had been assigned as her intended mate 7 years ago. Theron would not meet her eyes. She had known then. In that single moment of cowardice, she had understood what was about to happen. But understanding did not prepare her for the words themselves, or for the way they cut through her like a blade forged from ice and contempt. Theron stepped forward, his voice carrying across the silent hall with rehearsed precision. She could tell he had practiced this speech, perhaps for days, perhaps for weeks. Every word designed to wound, every phrase crafted for maximum humiliation. She is a curse upon this pack. The words hung in the air like poison smoke. Look at her. White hair like bleached bone, skin like something pulled from a grave, eyes the color of watered blood. She is not natural. She is not one of us. She has never been one of us. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Agreement. Relief. As if they had all been waiting for someone to finally say what they had been thinking for 23 years. Theron raised his chin, emboldened by the crowd's response. I refuse this union. I will not bind myself to a ghost. I will not sire children with a creature that looks more dead than alive. Find another pack foolish enough to take her. Thornwood wants nothing to do with Seraphina the Cursed. The last 2 words struck her like a physical blow. Seraphina the Cursed. She had heard the whispers all her life, but never spoken aloud in the great hall, never made official. High Alpha Malachar rose from his throne, and the hall fell silent once more. His voice was deep, commanding, carrying the weight of absolute authority. The rejection is witnessed and accepted. Seraphina of no family, you are hereby banished from Thornwood territory. You have until sunset to cross our borders. If you are found on our lands after darkness falls, you will be executed as a trespasser. This is my word. This is law. 300 wolves watched her. 300 wolves waited for her to break, to cry, to beg for mercy that would never come. Seraphina did none of these things. Instead, she looked directly at High Alpha Malachar, meeting his dark eyes with her own blood-colored gaze. Something flickered in his expression, something that might have been surprise, or perhaps recognition of something he had not expected to find. She spoke only 4 words, but she spoke them clearly, so that every wolf in the great hall could hear. I will remember this. Then she turned and walked toward the doors, her steps measured and unhurried. She did not run. She did not flee. She walked out of the great hall of Thornwood Pack with her head held high, and she did not look back. Behind her, she heard Malachar's voice, low and thoughtful, speaking to someone she could not see. Interesting. Most interesting indeed. She did not understand what he meant. She did not care. All that mattered now was survival. The forest swallowed her like a living thing, branches closing behind her as if the trees themselves wanted to erase any trace of her passage. Seraphina moved through the undergrowth with practiced ease, her feet finding solid ground where others would have stumbled, her eyes reading the terrain with the skill of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to navigate the wild places alone. They had given her nothing. No supplies, no food, no water, not even a blade to defend herself. Just the simple gray dress she wore and the thin cloak across her shoulders. It was more than she had expected. The first day she walked until her legs burned and her lungs ached, putting as much distance as possible between herself and Thornwood territory. She did not stop to rest. She did not stop to eat. She simply moved, 1 foot in front of the other, heading north toward the neutral grounds where the laws of the great packs did not reach. The forest changed as she traveled. The familiar oaks and maples of Thornwood gave way to older growth, pines and spruces that blocked out the sunlight and filled the air with the sharp scent of resin. The undergrowth thinned, replaced by carpets of brown needles that muffled her footsteps. She was grateful for the cover, even as she mourned the loss of the edible plants that grew in sunnier areas. By nightfall of the first day, she had covered perhaps 15 miles. Her feet were blistered, her legs trembling with exhaustion, but she forced herself to keep moving for another hour before finally allowing herself to stop. She found a hollow beneath an ancient fallen tree, crawled inside, covered herself with dead leaves and pine needles, and slept with one eye open, jerking awake at every sound. No one came for her. Perhaps they had not bothered to send trackers. Perhaps they simply did not care enough to ensure she actually left. Either way, she was grateful for their indifference. As she walked, memories surfaced unbidden. Fragments of a life spent on the margins, never quite belonging, never quite accepted. She remembered being 5 years old, watching her parents leave for what they said would be a simple border patrol. Her mother had knelt before her, brushing the white hair back from her face with gentle fingers. Even now, more than 18 years later, Seraphina could recall the exact shade of her mother's eyes. They had been the same unusual color as her own, that pale pink that others found so disturbing. But in her mother's face, those eyes had held only warmth and love. "We will return before the moon rises, little one. Stay with Elder Mora. Be good." Her father had stood behind her mother, tall and strong, with the kind of quiet confidence that made others feel safe in his presence. He had ruffled her white hair and called her his little snowflake, promised to bring her something special from the southern meadows where they were patrolling. She had watched them walk away until they disappeared into the tree line. She had waited by the window of Elder Mora's cottage until the moon rose. And then she had kept waiting, through the night, through the dawn, through the morning that followed. They never returned. The pack had told her it was a border skirmish with a rival territory, an ambush, both killed, defending Thornwood. Heroes, they said. Your parents died as heroes. But even as a child, Seraphina had sensed the lie beneath the words. The way the elders looked at each other when they spoke of her parents. The way conversations stopped when she entered a room. The way no one would meet her eyes when she asked questions about that night. There were other things, too. Small details that had not made sense to her 5-year-old mind, but had lodged in her memory like splinters. The fact that her parents' bodies were never returned for proper burial. The way High Alpha Malachar himself had overseen the telling of the news, watching her face with an intensity that had frightened her even then. The locked chest her mother had kept in their cottage, the one that disappeared the day after her death, the one that Seraphina had been forbidden to ask about. She had been passed from family to family after that, never staying anywhere for long. No one wanted the responsibility of raising the white-haired child with the unsettling eyes. Some families lasted a few months before making excuses. Others barely made it a week before returning her to the pack's communal care, like a defective item being exchanged. She learned to take care of herself because no one else would. She learned to find food in the forest when meals were forgotten or withheld. She learned to read tracks and set snares. She learned which plants could heal and which could kill. She learned to move silently, to become invisible, to exist in the spaces between where others did not think to look. She learned that she could only ever rely on herself. At 16, she had presented as an Omega, and the pack's treatment of her crystallized into something official. Omegas were meant to be cherished, protected, valued for their ability to calm aggressive wolves and bear strong children. But Seraphina was assigned to Theron, a mid-ranking beta with no particular prospects, someone the pack could afford to waste on a mate no one wanted. For 7 years, she had existed in limbo, not quite mated, not quite free. Theron had never touched her, never shown her kindness, barely acknowledged her existence except when protocol demanded. She had spent those years preparing, though she had not known for what. Learning everything she could about survival, about the wild places beyond pack territory, about the world that existed outside the borders she had never been allowed to cross. Now she understood. Some part of her had always known this day would come. By the second day, hunger had become a constant companion. She found a stream and drank deeply, then followed it north, knowing that water would lead her to game trails and edible plants. She set snares using techniques she had taught herself from watching the pack's hunters, and by nightfall, she had caught a rabbit. She made no fire, eating the meat raw and burying the remains to hide her trail. She was not foolish enough to think she was safe. Rogues hunted these forests, wolves who had been cast out from their packs or who had chosen to abandon pack life entirely. Some were merely lost souls seeking freedom. Others were predators of the worst kind, wolves who had descended into savagery without pack bonds to anchor their humanity. On the third day she heard them. Voices carried through the trees, male, rough, multiple speakers moving with coordination. She froze, her white hair catching the afternoon sunlight in a way that made her painfully visible against the green forest. She scanned her surroundings, looking for cover, but the forest here was too open. She had made a mistake traveling through this stretch during daylight hours, a mistake that might cost her everything. 5 men emerged from the trees, spreading out with practiced ease to form a semicircle that blocked her escape routes. They were rogues. She recognized the signs immediately. The torn and stained clothing, the wild eyes of wolves who had been without pack bonds for too long, the hunger in their gazes that had nothing to do with food. The largest of them stepped forward. His face was a ruin of scar tissue, as if someone had tried to destroy it and nearly succeeded. When he smiled, the expression pulled his features into something grotesque. "What have we here? A little ghost girl wandering the forest all alone? You lost, sweetheart?" Seraphina's hands moved slowly to her sides, her mind racing through options. She had no weapon. She was outnumbered 5 to 1. Running would be pointless. They would catch her before she had gone 20 paces. But she was not helpless. She had never been helpless. "I am passing through. I want no trouble with you." The scarred man laughed, and the sound was like stones grinding together. "Hear that, boys? She wants no trouble. Too bad for her that trouble is exactly what we are looking for." A thin man with a face like a rat moved closer, his eyes crawling over her body in a way that made her skin try to peel itself from her bones. "Been a long time since we had any fun. Months since the last patrol came through. No one to stop us from taking what we want. And what we want is you, pretty ghost girl." Seraphina felt fear then, cold and sharp, and flooding through her veins like ice water. But fear was an old companion. She had been afraid her entire life, afraid of the whispers, afraid of the rejection she had always known was coming, afraid of the shadows that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. Fear had never stopped her before. She moved before they expected it, lunging toward the smallest gap in their formation, not running, but attacking. Her fingers found a stone, and she hurled it at the rat-faced man's eyes, then changed direction, driving her elbow into the throat of the youngest rogue as he reached for her. He went down gagging, and for one glorious moment she thought she might actually break through. Then hands like iron bands closed around her arms, and the scarred man slammed her against a tree trunk with force that drove the air from her lungs and sent stars bursting across her vision. "Got some fight in you. I like that." His breath was hot and rotten against her face, smelling of old meat and decay. "Makes it more interesting when we break you." Seraphina struggled, but his grip was immovable. The other rogues closed in, forming a tight circle. She could see the intent in their eyes, the violence they had planned, the suffering they would inflict before they finally let her die. This was how it would end. After everything she had survived, after 23 years of enduring contempt and isolation and cruelty, she would die in an unmarked stretch of forest at the hands of monsters who did not even know her name. Something inside her refused to accept it. The feeling began in her chest, a warmth that spread outward like ripples in a still pond. It grew stronger with each heartbeat, building and building until it felt like her bones were filled with lightning, like her blood had turned to liquid fire. The scarred man saw something change in her eyes. His smile faltered. "What the?" Power erupted from her body like a shockwave. The rogues were hurled backward with tremendous force, their bodies striking trees and boulders with sounds of breaking bones and tearing flesh. The scarred man flew 10 feet through the air before colliding with an oak trunk with a crack that suggested ribs shattering. The rat-faced one hit a boulder and crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut. And around Seraphina, shimmering into existence like crystallized moonlight, a barrier formed. Translucent and glowing with soft white luminescence, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, it created a perfect dome that extended 6 feet in every direction. She stared at her hands in shock. They were glowing. Faint traceries of light ran beneath her skin like veins of pure energy. What had she done? What was this power that had slept inside her all her life, waiting for this moment of desperate need to awaken? The shield was beautiful, ethereal, like frozen starlight given form and substance. She could see through it, but she knew with absolute certainty that nothing could penetrate it without her permission. The rogues were picking themselves up, cursing and bleeding from their injuries. The scarred man's face was twisted with pain and fury, blood streaming from where his skull had struck the tree. "The ghost girl has teeth. Fine, we will beat the fight out of you first. Break whatever that thing is, and then break you." They came at her again, all four who could still move, hammering at the barrier with fists and claws. The impact sent ripples across the surface like waves on water, but the shield held firm. It did not crack. It did not weaken. Seraphina backed into the center of her protective dome, her hands shaking, not understanding what was happening, but grateful beyond words for it. Then she noticed something else. The shield was draining her. She could feel energy flowing out of her body to maintain the barrier, like blood seeping from an invisible wound. The warmth in her chest was fading, replaced by a growing cold that spread through her limbs. She could not maintain this forever. Minutes, perhaps, an hour at most, and these rogues showed no sign of giving up. The scarred man circled her barrier, testing it for weaknesses, looking for any crack in her defense. "You cannot keep this up forever, ghost girl. And when it falls, we are going to make you pay for every second you made us wait." He was right. She was going to die here. She had only delayed the inevitable by a few desperate minutes. Then she heard it, growling, low and menacing and coming from all directions. Not one or two wolves, many, too many to count. The rogues stopped their assault. Their confident aggression evaporated into something she had never expected to see on their faces. Terror. Wolves emerged from the forest like spirits materializing from shadow. 20 of them, all massive, all with white or silver fur that gleamed in the filtered sunlight. They moved with coordinated precision that spoke of military training, surrounding the rogues with practiced efficiency and cutting off every escape route. These were not rogues. These were elite warriors, a coordinated unit that moved as one. At the front of the formation was the largest wolf Seraphina had ever seen. His fur was pure white, pristine as fresh snow, his eyes ice blue and burning with a fury that went beyond mere anger into something colder and far more dangerous. This was not rage, this was judgment. One of the rogues recognized him. His voice came out as a broken whisper. "That is the Northern Guard, that is the Lord Commander himself." The white wolf shifted, and Seraphina watched in awe as a man took his place. The transformation was smooth, almost graceful, nothing like the painful process she had witnessed among Thornwood wolves. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with platinum blonde hair that fell past his shoulders in thick waves, ice-blue eyes that looked capable of freezing fire itself. He was heavily muscled with the build of a warrior who had spent decades training for battle, his torso decorated with scars that spoke of countless fights survived. He looked like something out of ancient legends, a warrior king carved from ice and fury and ancient power. And he looked absolutely murderous. "You are on my territory attacking an Omega. That is 2 death sentences under Northern law." The scarred rogue's face had gone pale, all his earlier confidence completely gone. "We did not know she was yours, Lord Commander. We thought she was just a rogue. Fair game. No pack protection." The Lord Commander's expression did not change. "There is no such thing as fair game when it comes to attacking Omegas, and she is not mine. But that does not matter. The crime is the same regardless of whether the Omega is claimed. You know Northern law. You chose to break it anyway." He looked at the 20 wolves surrounding the rogues, his elite guard standing ready for his command. "Leave none alive. Make it quick. They deserve no prolonged suffering, just permanent removal from existence." What happened next was brutal and efficient. The wolves descended on the rogues like a force of nature, all coordination and lethal precision. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Professional, without mercy or hesitation. It was over in less than a minute. Seraphina watched from inside her shield, too shocked to move or speak. She had just witnessed 5 men die. She should feel horror. She should feel something other than this strange numbness. Instead, all she felt was relief and a sense of safety she had not experienced in years, perhaps ever. The Lord Commander approached her barrier, his warriors holding position behind him in a protective formation. Up close, he was even more imposing. His presence seemed to fill the space around him, commanding attention without effort or intention. He studied the shield with interest, reaching out to touch it lightly. His fingers met resistance, and ripples spread across the surface where he made contact. Remarkable work. A perfectly formed energy matrix, stable and self-sustaining. You can lower it now. You are safe. I give you my word as Lord Commander of the Northern Territories. Seraphina wanted to believe him, but fear and years of betrayal had her locked in place. I do not know how. I do not understand what this is or how I created it. This is not normal. I'm not supposed to be able to do this. Something shifted in his expression. The harsh lines of his face eased slightly, though he remained far from soft. You are a shield bearer. It is an ancient gift, one of the rarest the moon goddess can bestow. The barrier responds to your emotions, particularly fear and the desire to protect. You need to calm yourself. Accept that you are safe now, and it will dissipate. But you must do it soon. You are bleeding through your energy reserves faster than you realize. If you maintain it much longer, you will collapse. Shield bearer. Seraphina had never heard the term. Her pack had never mentioned anything like this. I will explain everything. But first you need to lower the shield. Focus on your breathing. Trust that you are safe now. Trust me. Trust. Such a small word for something so impossible. She had trusted once, as a child, and been abandoned. She had trusted that her pack would accept her, and been cast out. She had trusted that fate would give her something other than misery, and been proven wrong at every turn. But what choice did she have now? She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She focused on her breathing, slow and deep, forcing her body to accept that the danger had passed. She thought about the rogues lying dead on the forest floor. She thought about the 20 warriors standing between her and any threat. Slowly, gradually, the shield began to fade. The light dimmed, the solid barrier becoming translucent, then transparent, then disappearing completely like morning mist under sunrise. The moment it was gone, her legs gave out. She did not hit the ground. The Lord Commander moved faster than should have been possible for someone his size, catching her before she could fall and pulling her against his chest. I have you. You are safe now. No one is going to hurt you. His voice was surprisingly gentle, at odds with the cold authority he had displayed moments before. His arms were strong and steady, holding her upright when her own body refused to cooperate. Seraphina wanted to push him away. She had just been rescued like a damsel in a children's tale. She should be embarrassed. She should maintain her dignity. But she was so tired, so scared, so overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She allowed herself to lean against him just for a moment, just until the trembling stopped. What is your name? Seraphina. No family name, just Seraphina. Something flickered in his ice-blue eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or confirmation of something he had suspected. I am Aldrich, Lord Commander of the Northern Territories, and I am very glad I found you when I did. A few more minutes and— He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. You were patrolling this far into the neutral grounds? We have been tracking these rogues for weeks. They are part of a larger network that has been attacking vulnerable wolves throughout the border regions. We intended to capture them for questioning. He looked at the bodies on the ground, and his jaw tightened. But when I saw what they were attempting to do to you, capture was no longer an option. Some crimes do not deserve the luxury of a trial. Seraphina pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Thank you. If you had not come— But I did come, and you are safe now. Can you walk, or shall I carry you? My territory is about 2 miles north. You need food, rest, and a healer to examine you properly. She tried to stand on her own, but her legs were still shaking too badly to support her weight. Aldrich solved the problem by simply lifting her into his arms, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing at all. I can walk. I am certain you can. But you are exhausted from using your gift for the first time. You are clearly malnourished from days without proper food, and you have just survived a traumatic attack. Allow me to help you. There was something in his voice, not warmth exactly, but a kind of stern practicality that somehow felt more trustworthy than kindness would have. She nodded and let herself relax against him. The 20 wolves shifted back to human form, revealing a mix of men and women, all powerfully built, all bearing the marks of elite warriors. They ranged from their late 20s to early 40s, with the pale hair and light eyes common to northern breeds. A tall woman with silver-white hair approached Aldrich, her gray eyes assessing Seraphina with professional detachment. Is she injured, Lord Commander? Shock and exhaustion primarily. But have Elder Corvus examine her thoroughly when we return. I want to know everything about her condition. The woman raised an eyebrow, a gesture that suggested this level of concern was unusual. Sir? Just do it, General Freya. The woman nodded and shifted back to wolf form, racing ahead toward what Seraphina assumed was the northern settlement. The other wolves formed a protective circle around them as Aldrich began walking, still carrying her as if she were precious cargo. They traveled in silence for a time, the forest gradually changing around them. The trees grew taller, older, their trunks wider than a man could wrap his arms around. The air became colder, crisper, carrying the scent of snow from distant mountains. Finally, Seraphina spoke. "You called me a shield bearer. What does that mean exactly?" Aldrich glanced down at her, his ice-blue eyes thoughtful. "It means you have the ability to create protective barriers, shields that can deflect both physical and magical attacks. In the ancient texts, shield bearers could protect entire villages from invasion. They could shield vulnerable pack members during battle. They could create barriers that lasted for days." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was heavier. "There has not been a confirmed shield bearer in the Northern Territories in over 100 years. The gift was believed to be extinct. I did not know I could do any of this. No one ever told me I might have such a power. They only told me I was wrong, broken, that something was fundamentally defective about me." Aldrich's expression hardened. "Who told you that?" "Everyone. My pack, the High Alpha, the male who was supposed to be my mate. They called me cursed. They said I was a ghost, that I looked dead, that I was marked by the moon goddess for suffering." She felt the tension in his arms, the subtle tightening of his muscles. "What pack?" "Thornwood. I was banished 3 days ago. I have been walking since then, heading toward the neutral grounds." "Thornwood." The word came out flat, dangerous, loaded with meaning she did not understand. "High Alpha Malakar's territory." "Yes, you know him?" "I know of him. We will speak more of this later." They emerged from the forest into a clearing, and Seraphina saw the northern settlement for the first time. It was not what she had expected, not a simple pack village, but a fortress. Massive stone walls surrounded a compound of buildings that seemed to have grown from the landscape itself, all natural materials and practical design. Guard towers stood at regular intervals along the perimeter, manned by watchful sentries who tracked their approach with professional attention. The walls were at least 30 feet high, built from granite blocks that must have been quarried from the nearby mountains. They were old, these walls, ancient, covered in places with moss and lichen that spoke of centuries of existence. And yet they were perfectly maintained, not a single crack or weak point visible anywhere along their length. Inside the walls, the settlement spread across several acres. She could see training grounds where wolves in human form practiced combat drills with wooden weapons. Barracks stood in neat rows, large enough to house hundreds of warriors. Administrative buildings clustered around a central square, their architecture functional, but not without a certain austere beauty. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of organization, of discipline, of a pack that operated more like an army than a family. This was not just a pack territory. This was a military installation, a base of operations for whatever forces the Lord Commander led. Wolves moved through the streets with purpose, stopping to salute as Aldrich passed. They looked at Seraphina with curiosity, but not hostility, some nodding respectfully when they noticed she was cradled in their leader's arms. Whatever they thought of her strange appearance, they kept their opinions to themselves. Aldrich carried her directly to the largest building, an impressive structure that managed to look both ancient and formidable. Inside, it was warmer than she had expected, with thick furs covering the floors and fireplaces that drove away the mountain chill. An elderly man was waiting in what appeared to be a reception hall. He had silver hair and sharp dark eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "Lord Commander, General Freya said you required healing services urgently." "Elder Corvus, this is Seraphina. She activated her gift for the first time today under extreme stress. She is exhausted and possibly injured. Examine her thoroughly. I want a complete assessment." Aldrich set her carefully on a couch covered in soft furs, then stepped back to give the healer room to work. Elder Corvus approached her slowly, his manner gentle but professional. But when he saw her face, when he looked into her blood-colored eyes, he stopped. His own eyes widened dramatically, and all the color drained from his face. "By the goddess." He turned to look at Aldrich, and something passed between them. A communication that Seraphina could not interpret. "Lord Commander, we need to speak privately, now." Aldrich's expression did not change, but she saw his shoulders tense. "Examine her first, then we will talk." Elder Corvus hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but decades of discipline won out. He turned back to Seraphina and began his examination, checking for injuries with practiced hands, while asking questions about her symptoms, her energy levels, any pain she might be experiencing. Throughout it all, Seraphina watched Aldrich. He stood near the doorway, his arms crossed, his ice-blue eyes never leaving her. There was something in his gaze now, something that had not been there before, something that looked almost like recognition. Finally, Elder Corvus stepped back. She is malnourished, dehydrated, exhausted from magical drain. There is bruising on her ribs and wrists where she was grabbed, but no serious injuries beyond that. She needs food, water, rest, and time to recover her reserves. She should not use her gift for at least 1 week, possibly longer. Aldrich nodded. See to it. Prepare quarters in the East Wing. She is to have whatever she needs. Best food, comfortable accommodations, whatever will help her recover fastest. Elder Corvus bowed. Of course, Lord Commander, but first we must speak. What I have to tell you cannot wait. Aldrich's jaw tightened. He looked at Seraphina, then back at the healer. Very well. General Freya, remain with her. I will return shortly. The silver-haired woman who had questioned him earlier stepped forward, positioning herself near Seraphina with casual readiness. Her gray eyes were watchful, assessing, not quite hostile but far from friendly. Aldrich and Elder Corvus disappeared through a side door, and Seraphina heard the click of a lock engaging behind them. She was alone with General Freya and her suspicions, in a strange fortress filled with warriors she did not know, having just discovered that she possessed a power she did not understand. For the first time in 3 days, she felt the full weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Her eyes grew heavy. Her body ached with a bone-deep weariness that went beyond mere physical fatigue. She did not intend to sleep. She did not think it possible, surrounded by strangers in an unfamiliar place. But sleep took her anyway, pulling her down into darkness before she could resist. In a locked chamber on the other side of the building, Aldrich stood with his back to the door, watching Elder Corvus pace before the fireplace. The old healer's hands were trembling. Aldrich had known Corvus for 30 years and had never seen him so shaken. Speak. Elder Corvus stopped pacing and turned to face him. Her eyes, her coloring, the gift that awakened under extreme stress. Lord Commander, she is not just any shield-bearer. Then what is she? Corvus took a deep breath, steadying himself. 23 years ago, there was a woman named Isolde Dawnkeeper. She was the last known shield-bearer in any territory. Her power was extraordinary. She could create barriers that spanned hundreds of feet. She could maintain them for days without rest. Aldrich felt something cold settle in his chest. I have heard of her. She died in the northern border conflicts. That is what the Covenant told everyone. But I knew Isolde personally, Lord Commander. I trained under her mother when I was young. I saw Isolde create her first shield when she was barely 16 years old. He met Aldrich's eyes, and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Isolde did not die in the border conflicts. She was assassinated 18 years ago, and the girl sleeping in your great hall right now is her daughter. Aldrich felt the world tilt beneath his feet. You are certain. I would stake my life on it. The coloring, the eyes, the way her gift manifested under threat. But more than that, I remember when Isolde was pregnant. I remember her fear that someone would discover what her child might become. She hid the pregnancy, gave birth in secret, arranged for the baby to be raised somewhere she thought would be safe. Where? Thornwood. She trusted High Alpha Malachar to protect her daughter until she came of age. For 5 years, Isolde remained close to her child, watching from the shadows, visiting when she could without arousing suspicion. Then Malachar decided the mother was a liability. The cold in Aldrich's chest turned to ice. Malachar. The High Alpha who just banished this girl for being cursed. The High Alpha who is one of the 7 members of the Covenant. Yes, he killed Isolde when the child was 5 years old. He told the girl her parents died in a border skirmish. He raised her in misery, hiding her gift, waiting for the day he could use her for his own purposes. Aldrich moved to the window, staring out at the fortress he had built over decades of service. His mind was racing, processing implications, calculating probabilities, weighing courses of action. If Malachar knew what she was all along, he did know. He had to know. Isolde would have told him everything when she entrusted her child to his care, which means he deliberately hid the girl's gift, deliberately suppressed it, deliberately cast her out when the time was right. Why? What purpose would that serve? Elder Corvus was quiet for a long moment. I do not know, but I know this much. Isolde was killed because Malachar feared what a free shield-bearer could do, because he wanted to control that power rather than let it exist beyond his grasp. If he has now cast the daughter out, then Seraphina is in more danger than she knows. Aldrich turned from the window. His decision was already made. Had been made the moment he saw her standing alone against 5 rogues, defiant and unbroken, a shield of pure light surrounding her like armor forged from starlight. She stays here, under my protection, and no one outside this room learns what she truly is until I understand what game Malachar is playing. And if the Covenant demands her surrender? Aldrich's eyes went cold, colder than they had been when he ordered the execution of the rogues, colder than the mountain winds that howled outside the fortress walls. Then the Covenant will learn that some things are worth more than political alliances. Some things are worth going to war for. He moved toward the door. Keep this between us, Corvus. Not even Freya learns the full truth. Not yet. I need time to investigate, to gather information, to understand what we are truly facing. What will you tell the girl? The truth. Or as much of it as she can bear. She deserves to know who she is. She deserves to know what happened to her mother. He paused with his hand on the door handle, and she deserves the chance to decide what she wants to do with that knowledge. I will not make choices for her. She has had enough of that in her life. Elder Corvus nodded slowly. You are a good man, Aldrich. Your father would be proud. Aldrich did not respond. He simply opened the door and walked out, back toward the great hall where a young woman with white hair and blood-colored eyes slept fitfully, dreaming of shields and shadows and a mother she had never known. He did not know it yet, but his life had just changed forever. They all had. And somewhere far to the south, in the great hall of Thornwood Pack, High Alpha Malachar sat upon his throne and smiled. The girl had awakened her gift. The Lord Commander had taken her in. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. 3 weeks had passed since Seraphina arrived at the northern fortress, and in that time she had learned 2 things with absolute certainty. The first was that her gift was far more powerful than anyone had initially suspected. Under Elder Corvus's patient instruction, she had progressed from barely being able to summon a flickering barrier to creating shields that could withstand the full force of a charging warrior. The old healer watched her training sessions with an expression that mixed pride with something darker. Concern, perhaps, or fear of what she might become. The second thing she had learned was that General Freya did not trust her, not even slightly. The silver-haired woman made no secret of her suspicions. She watched Seraphina's every move with cold gray eyes, questioned her presence at every opportunity, and made it clear to anyone who would listen that allowing a stranger into the heart of their military compound was a foolish decision that would bring ruin upon them all. Seraphina did not blame her. In Freya's position, she would have felt the same. The training yard was empty this morning, the other warriors still in the mess hall breaking their fast. Seraphina preferred it this way, fewer eyes watching, fewer whispers to ignore. She stood in the center of the packed earth circle and focused on her breathing, drawing her awareness inward to that warm place in her chest where the power lived. Create the shield, hold it, expand it, release it, repeat. The barrier shimmered into existence around her, translucent and glowing with soft white light. She pushed outward, feeling the energy flow from her core through invisible channels in her body, watching the dome expand to cover 10 feet, then 15, then 20. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her muscles trembled with effort that had nothing to do with physical exertion. 20 feet was her limit. Beyond that, the shield became unstable, flickering and threatening to collapse. She held it for a count of 60, then released. The barrier dissolved into motes of fading light, and she bent over with her hands on her knees, breathing hard. Impressive progress for 3 weeks. She straightened to find Lord Commander Aldrich standing at the edge of the training yard. He was dressed in simple training clothes rather than his usual formal attire, his platinum hair tied back from his face. In his hands he carried 2 wooden practice swords. She had seen little of him since that first night. He had visited her quarters twice to check on her recovery, brief visits marked by formal courtesy and careful distance. She had heard from others that he was occupied with matters of state, with communications to other territories, with the endless responsibilities of command. But she had also noticed him watching her from windows and doorways, observing her training, tracking her movements through the compound, always present, even when he was not physically there. Elder Corvus tells me you have been asking questions. Seraphina straightened her spine. She would not apologize for seeking the truth. I want to know about my mother, about what really happened to her, about why I was hidden in Thornwood for 18 years. Aldrich nodded slowly. He walked into the training yard and offered her one of the practice swords. "Ask your questions while we spar. Your gift is impressive, but you cannot rely on it alone. What happens if you are too drained to create a shield? What happens if you are surprised before you can summon one?" She took the sword. It was heavier than she expected. The wood weighted to simulate real steel. "I am not a warrior." "Not yet, but you can learn. Everyone can learn if they are willing to put in the work." He raised his own sword and dropped into a ready stance. His movements were fluid, practiced, the result of decades of training carved into muscle memory. "Your mother's name was Isolde Dawnkeeper. She was the last known shield-bearer before you. Her power was extraordinary. According to the records Elder Corvus has shown me, she could create barriers that spanned hundreds of feet and maintain them for days without rest." He moved, a simple thrust toward her midsection. Seraphina managed to deflect it, barely, the impact jarring her arms. She was also a member of a secret faction within the Covenant, a group that believed shield-bearers should be protected and cultivated rather than feared and controlled. They operated in the shadows, hiding those with the gift from those who would use them as weapons. Seraphina attacked, a clumsy overhead swing that Aldrich sidestepped easily. Who would use them as weapons? The Covenant itself. Or rather, certain members of it. The 7 High Alphas who rule our kind have always been divided on the question of rare gifts. Some believe they should be nurtured, others believe they should be controlled, and a few believe they should be eliminated entirely to prevent anyone from gaining too much power. He pressed forward, a series of quick strikes that forced her backward. She blocked some. Others slipped past her guard and tapped her shoulders, her ribs, her thigh. Each touch was light enough not to bruise, but firm enough to remind her of her vulnerability. 23 years ago, your mother became pregnant with you. She knew the child might inherit her gift. She also knew that certain members of the Covenant would stop at nothing to control or destroy such a child. So she hid her pregnancy, gave birth in secret, and entrusted you to someone she believed she could trust, High Alpha Malachar. Aldrich's expression darkened. Yes, they had been allies once. Or so she believed. He promised to keep you safe, to raise you without revealing your potential, to protect you until you were old enough to defend yourself. For 5 years, it seemed to work. Your mother stayed close, watching over you from the shadows, visiting when she could without arousing suspicion. He paused, lowering his sword slightly. But Malachar grew impatient. He decided that Isolde was a liability, that she might one day try to take you away, that he could not fully control you while she lived. So when you were 5 years old, he had her killed. He told the pack it was a border skirmish. He told you your parents died as heroes. Seraphina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The memories she had carried all her life, the vague impressions of warmth and safety, the face she could barely remember. Her mother had been alive. Her mother had been watching over her, and Malachar had taken that away. He murdered her. He did more than murder her. He erased her, made sure no one would remember what she truly was. Then he kept you as a hidden asset, suppressing your gift, making sure you never discovered what you could become, waiting until the time was right to reveal you and claim your power for himself. Seraphina felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. The practice sword felt suddenly inadequate. She wanted a real blade. She wanted to drive it through the heart of the man who had made her childhood a misery. Then why banish me? Why cast me out if he wanted to control me? Aldrich lowered his sword, his ice-blue eyes studying her face. That is what we are trying to determine. The banishment makes no sense unless it was part of a larger plan, unless he wanted you to end up somewhere specific, unless he wanted something to happen that could only happen if you were outside his direct control. Seraphina thought about the rogues in the forest, about how conveniently they had found her, about how the Northern Guard had arrived just in time to save her. The rogues, they were not random. Aldrich nodded grimly. We captured one of the rogues alive. Under interrogation, he revealed that they were paid to hunt for a white-haired Omega traveling through the neutral grounds. They were given specific instructions. Capture, not kill. Deliver to a location south of here. To Malachar. To someone working for Malachar. The rogue did not know the final destination, only the meeting point. Seraphina felt cold despite the warmth of exertion. Her entire life had been a game. Her suffering, her isolation, her banishment. All of it orchestrated by a man who had murdered her mother and stolen her childhood for purposes she could not fathom. Why? What does he want with me? I do not know yet, but I intend to find out. Aldrich raised his sword again. In the meantime, you train, you grow stronger, you learn to defend yourself with blade and with gift, and you trust no one outside this compound, not even those who seem friendly, not even those who offer help. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something almost vulnerable. Can you do that? Can you trust me enough to stay and fight, even knowing the danger? Seraphina considered the question. Trust was not something she gave easily. It had been beaten out of her through years of betrayal and disappointment. But Aldrich had saved her life. He had given her shelter. He had told her the truth about her mother when he could have kept her ignorant. More than that, he had treated her like a person, not a curse, not a tool, not a burden to be tolerated until she could be discarded. I can try. Something like approval flickered in his ice-blue eyes. That is all I ask. They continued sparring until the sun was high overhead and Seraphina's arms burned with fatigue. Aldrich corrected her form, demonstrated techniques, pushed her to move faster and strike harder. He was a demanding teacher, but fair. He never mocked her failures or belittled her progress. When they finally stopped, both breathing hard, he surprised her with a question. Why do you think they called you cursed? Your pack. What did they see in you that frightened them so much? Seraphina wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. My appearance, the white hair, the pale skin, the eyes. I look like something dead, something unnatural. Aldrich shook his head slowly. You look like a shield bearer. The coloring is a mark of the gift, passed down through bloodlines. Your mother had the same features. So did her mother before her. It is not a curse. It is a sign of power. He stepped closer and she resisted the urge to step back. They feared you because somewhere deep down they sensed what you could become. Not a ghost, not a curse, a protector, a shield against the darkness. They feared you because they knew they were not worthy of your protection. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever suggested that her appearance was anything other than a flaw to be ashamed of. She did not know how to respond, so she said nothing. Aldrich seemed to understand. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving her alone in the training yard with thoughts she did not know how to process. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Seraphina found strangely comforting. For the first time in her life, she had structure. Purpose. People who expected things of her, not out of contempt or obligation, but because they believed she had something to offer. Mornings began before dawn with Elder Corvus. They would meet in a private chamber deep within the fortress, a room lined with ancient stones that seemed to hum with residual energy. Here, away from prying eyes, she learned to control and expand her gift. The shield is not separate from you. It is you, an extension of your will made manifest in the physical world. Corvus would have her meditate, focusing on that warm place in her chest where the power resided. She learned to summon it without fear, to shape it with intention rather than desperation. Some days they practiced duration, seeing how long she could maintain a barrier without faltering. Other days they worked on precision, creating shields of specific shapes and sizes. Afternoons belonged to combat training with various members of the Northern Guard. They rotated instructors, each one teaching her different aspects of warfare. Blade work with a grim warrior named Ash. Hand-to-hand techniques with a woman called River, whose deceptively small frame hid devastating strength. Tactics and strategy with an elder captain who had fought in 3 territorial wars. She was not a natural fighter. Her reflexes were slow, her strength limited, her instincts more inclined toward defense than offense. But she learned. Day by day, hour by hour, she improved. Evenings she spent alone in her quarters, reading the ancient texts that Corvus provided, learning the history of shield-bearers and the role they had once played in wolf society. She learned that shield-bearers had been revered in the old days, protected, cherished. They were considered gifts from the moon goddess herself, living shields meant to protect the vulnerable and innocent. Great houses had competed for the honor of having a shield-bearer in their lineage, but that was before the Great War, before the 7 packs united under the Covenant, before certain leaders decided that no single gift should be allowed to become too powerful. The purges had been thorough. Shield-bearers were hunted, captured, forced to serve specific high alphas. Those who refused were killed. Those who tried to hide were found and eliminated. Within 2 generations, the gift had been all but extinguished. Her mother had been one of the last survivors, and now she was gone, and Seraphina was alone. Or perhaps not entirely alone. One evening, she found Aldrich waiting for her in the library. He sat in a chair by the fire, a book open in his lap, though his eyes were fixed on the flames rather than the pages. She hesitated at the door. They had not spoken privately since their sparring session days ago. She had seen him in the training yard, at meals, in passing through the corridors, but always surrounded by others, always occupied with the demands of command. "You may enter, I do not bite." His voice held a trace of humor she had not heard before. She walked in and took the chair across from him. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with warmth. "Elder Corvus tells me you have been reading the old histories. I wanted to understand what I am, where I come from, what happened to others like me." Aldrich closed his book and set it aside. "And what have you learned?" "That my kind were hunted almost to extinction, that the very council meant to protect our people orchestrated the destruction of those born with gifts, that fear and politics matter more than justice or right." Aldrich nodded slowly. "You have learned the truth of power. It corrupts, it destroys. It makes monsters of those who hold it, and victims of those who do not." He leaned forward, his ice blue eyes catching the firelight. "But it does not have to be that way. Power can also protect. It can shield the innocent. It can stand against tyranny. The question is not whether power is good or evil. The question is what we choose to do with it." Seraphina thought about his words, about the shield that lived inside her, about the way it had erupted to protect her when she needed it most. "What do you choose to do with yours?" Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. "I choose to protect, to serve, to build something that will last beyond my own lifetime. When I was young, I thought power meant conquest, meant forcing others to bend to my will. My father taught me differently." His gaze drifted to the fire and his voice softened. He said that true strength is not in domination. It is in the willingness to sacrifice, to put the needs of others before your own, to stand in the gap between the innocent and those who would harm them. "He sounds like a wise man." He was. He died defending this territory from invasion 30 years ago. I was barely 20 when I took his place, far too young, far too ignorant. I made mistakes that cost lives. Aldrich looked at her, and she saw the weight of those years in his eyes, the burden of command, the scars that did not show on the skin. "But I learned, I grew, I built something here that he would be proud of, a territory where the weak are protected, where the different are not cast out, where anyone can find a home if they are willing to contribute." He paused, and something vulnerable crossed his features. "I also lost my Luna, my mate, Elira. She died of a wasting sickness 10 years ago. There was nothing the healers could do. I watched her fade away over months, unable to help, unable to save her. I am sorry." The words felt inadequate, but she said them anyway. "It was a long time ago. The grief has faded to something bearable, but I have not taken another mate since, have not wanted to. Some losses change you in ways that cannot be undone." He looked at her then, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain, a connection forged in the fires of loss. "You understand. I can see it in your eyes. You have lost too. Everyone I have ever cared about. My mother, taken from me when I was 5. The few wolves in my pack who treated me with basic decency. They are all gone, taken by death or circumstance or the cruelty of those who should have protected me. Then we are alike, two broken creatures, trying to find purpose in a world that has given us nothing but pain." Seraphina felt tears prick at her eyes. She had not cried in years, had taught herself that tears were weakness, and weakness was not allowed. But here, in this firelit room, with this man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return, she felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. "I do not know what I am supposed to do. I do not know who I am supposed to be. I have spent my entire life being told I was wrong, broken, cursed. And now you tell me I am a shield bearer, a gift from the moon goddess, a protector." She shook her head. "How am I supposed to protect anyone when I cannot even protect myself?" Aldrich rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat. He knelt before her, bringing his face level with hers, and his large hands covered her own where they rested in her lap. "You already have. In the forest when those rogues attacked you. You did not run. You did not surrender. You fought. And when fighting was not enough, you found the power inside yourself to create a shield that saved your life." His grip tightened slightly. "You are stronger than you know, Seraphina. Stronger than anyone has ever given you credit for. You have survived things that would have broken others. You have endured cruelty and rejection and isolation, and you have emerged with your spirit intact." He released her hands and stood. "That is not weakness. That is strength of the highest order. And I believe that when the time comes, when you are truly tested, you will rise to meet whatever challenge awaits." He walked toward the door, then paused. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we continue your training, and the day after that, and the day after that, until you are ready." "Ready for what?" Aldrich looked back at her, and his ice-blue eyes held a fierce determination. "For war." The crisis came without warning, as crises often do. Seraphina was in the training yard, practicing shield expansion under Elder Corvus's watchful eye, when the alarm bells began to ring, deep, resonant tones that echoed off the fortress walls and sent wolves running in all directions. "The gates! Someone is approaching the gates!" Corvus's face had gone pale. He grabbed Seraphina's arm and began pulling her toward the main building. "Come, you need to be hidden, now." "What is happening?" "No time to explain, move." But Seraphina pulled free of his grip. She was tired of being hidden, tired of being protected. If danger was coming, she wanted to face it. She ran toward the gates instead. The scene she found there would stay with her for the rest of her life. A man lay in the dirt just inside the fortress walls. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his clothes torn, his face barely recognizable beneath the blood and bruises. 2 warriors knelt beside him, trying to stem the flow of crimson from a gash in his throat. Aldrich stood over them, his face carved from stone. "Ren, can you hear me? Ren." The wounded man's eyes fluttered open. His lips moved, forming words that Seraphina could not hear. She pushed closer, ignoring the hands that tried to hold her back. Aldrich leaned down, his ear close to Ren's mouth. The dying man spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the gathered crowd, his words carried. "Malachar, building an army, thousands of rogues, hunters from the human world. He plans to wage war against all of mankind." Ren coughed and blood sprayed from his lips. "The girl, the shield bearer. He needs her to protect his forces when they march. That is why he let her go. He knew she would come here, knew you would take her in. He planned to retrieve her once she was trained, once she was useful." Aldrich's hand found the dying man's, gripping it tightly. "How do you know this?" "Captured. 3 weeks in his dungeons. They thought I would break. Thought I would tell them everything about the northern defenses. I told them nothing. But I listened. I heard everything. I escaped to warn you. The ultimatum comes. 7 days. Give her up or he attacks with everything he has." Captain Ren's body convulsed once, twice. His eyes found Seraphina in the crowd, and something like recognition flickered there. "You are the key, girl. The key to his victory or his defeat. Do not let him use you. Do not let my sacrifice be for nothing." Then the light faded from his eyes and Captain Ren was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Every wolf in the fortress stood frozen, staring at the body of their fallen comrade, processing the enormity of what he had revealed. Aldrich rose slowly. His face was expressionless, but Seraphina could see the fury burning behind his ice-blue eyes. "Prepare the War Council, summon all ranking officers, and send word to our allies in the Covenant. We need to know who stands with us and who stands against us." The crowd began to disperse, wolves moving with grim purpose. But Aldrich's next words stopped them. "No one speaks of the shield-bearer outside this compound. Not to anyone, not to family, not to friends, not to allies we think we can trust. As far as the outside world knows, she does not exist. Anyone who breaks this confidence will answer to me personally." His gaze swept the crowd, hard and uncompromising. "Is that understood?" A chorus of acknowledgement rose from the gathered wolves. Then they scattered, leaving only Aldrich, Seraphina, and the body of Captain Ren in the blood-stained dirt. "He died to bring us this warning." Aldrich's voice was quiet but heavy with grief. "He was one of my best. Volunteered for the infiltration mission 3 months ago. I should have pulled him out sooner. Should have realized something was wrong when his reports stopped coming." "You could not have known." "No, I could not have known, but that does not make it easier." He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his expression. Not weakness. Aldrich could never be weak. But humanity. The weight of command. The price of sending good people to die for a cause they might never see completed. "Malachar wants you. He has been planning this for years, perhaps decades. He killed your mother, hid you away, manipulated your entire life, all to reach this moment. All to use you as a weapon in a war that will destroy everything. His plan is not merely conquest, it is extinction. He believes that humans will eventually discover our kind, and when they do, they will seek to destroy us." He may not be entirely wrong about that fear. Humans have always feared what they do not understand, and they have weapons that could devastate our populations if turned against us. But his solution is madness. He wants to strike first, to use an army of rogues and turned humans to wage a preemptive war against mankind, to subjugate or eliminate the human threat before it can eliminate us. Aldrich's voice grew harder. The problem is that we cannot win such a war, not through force of arms. Humans are too numerous, too technologically advanced, too adaptable. Even if we won initial battles, they would learn. They would develop new weapons. They would hunt us to extinction with the same methodical efficiency they have used against every other species they deemed a threat. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A shield-bearer changes that calculation. With someone like you protecting his forces, Malachar believes he could create an army that is effectively invulnerable to human weapons. Bullets would stop at your barriers. Bombs would detonate harmlessly against your shields. His wolves could march through human cities without fear of retaliation. It would be genocide, not of our kind but of theirs. Seraphina felt the words settle into her bones. The scope of Malachar's deception was staggering. Every misery she had endured, every rejection and humiliation, had been deliberate, calculated, part of a plan so vast she could barely comprehend it. What will you do? I will fight. I will gather my allies. I will try to stop him before he can unleash this madness on the world. Aldrich stepped closer, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. But I will not make this choice for you. Malachar wants to use you. The Covenant wants to control you. Everyone sees you as a piece on a board, a tool to be deployed for their own purposes. His hand came up, hovering near her face, but not quite touching. I am asking what you want, not what I want, not what anyone else wants. What do you want, Seraphina? The question struck her like a physical blow. No one had ever asked her that, not once in her entire life. Her wants had never mattered. Her desires had never been considered. She had simply existed, moving through the world according to the wills of others. But now, standing in the blood-stained courtyard of a fortress at the edge of war, she found her answer. I want to fight. The words came out stronger than she expected. I want to stand against Malachar and everything he represents. I want to make him pay for what he did to my mother, for what he did to me, for what he plans to do to countless innocent people. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. I will not be a weapon for his war. I will not shield his armies while they slaughter innocents. I will stand against him, and if I die, I will die with a sword in my hand and a shield protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Aldrich stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, a smile crossed his face. Not a warm smile, something fiercer, something proud. Then we stand together. The War Council convened that night in the Great Hall. Aldrich sat at the head of a long table, flanked by his most trusted advisors. General Freya on his right, Elder Corvus on his left. Around the table sat the captains and lieutenants of the Northern Guard, grim-faced warriors who had dedicated their lives to protecting the territories. Seraphina was given a seat at the table, not at the far end as she had expected, but halfway down, between two senior captains who nodded respectfully as she took her place. Aldrich laid out the situation in clear, brutal terms. Malachar's army, the threat of war with humanity, the ultimatum that would surely arrive within days, the need to reach out to allies and determine who could be trusted. High Alpha Valorian of the Eastern Reaches is loyal to us. His territory borders Malachar's, and they have been enemies for generations. He will stand with us if we ask. General Freya consulted a map spread across the table. High Alpha Selene of the Coastal Dominion is harder to read. She has avoided conflict with the Covenant for decades. She may choose neutrality rather than risk her people. Neutrality is not an option. Aldrich's voice was hard. If Malachar wins, he will not stop at conquest. He will drag us into a war with humanity that we cannot win. The humans outnumber us 1,000 to 1. They have weapons we cannot match. Malachar's plan is not strength, it is extinction. An older captain spoke up, his face weathered by decades of service. What of the other high alphas? There are 7 seats on the Covenant. Malachar holds 1. You said 3 are in his pocket. That leaves 3 who might oppose him. Aldrich nodded grimly. High Alpha Valorian makes 2 against Malachar. If we can convince Selene, that makes 3. The other 2, High Alpha Thorn and High Alpha Vex, have stayed silent. They may be waiting to see which way the wind blows before committing. Cowards! Freya's voice dripped with contempt. They will support whoever they think will win. We need to show strength, Lord Commander. We need to demonstrate that Malachar can be defeated, that standing against him is not suicide. How? His forces outnumber ours 3-1, possibly more. And that is before counting the rogues and human hunters he has recruited to his cause. The table fell silent. Every face showed the same calculation, the same grim mathematics of war. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, fighting against an enemy who had spent years preparing for this moment while they remained ignorant. Seraphina spoke without planning to. He needs me. Every eye turned to her. That is what Captain Wren said. Malachar needs a shield-bearer to protect his army. That is why he let me go. That is why he sent the rogues to capture me. Without me, his forces are vulnerable to human weapons. Aldrich's expression sharpened. Go on. If I am the key to his plan, then I am also the key to stopping him. He cannot march against humanity without protection from their weapons. Guns, bombs, artillery, the things humans use to kill from a distance. A shield-bearer could block all of that, could make his army nearly invincible. She stood, her voice growing stronger. But he does not have me. I am here. I am training. And every day I grow stronger, I become less of a tool and more of a threat. If he attacks before I am ready, he loses his advantage. If he waits too long, he risks me becoming powerful enough to stand against him directly. Elder Corvus stroked his chin thoughtfully. She is right. Malachar is trapped by his own timeline. He cannot afford to wait, but he cannot afford to move without her either. That uncertainty is our greatest weapon. Aldrich leaned back in his chair, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Seraphina. You are suggesting we use you as bait. I am suggesting we use his need for me against him. Force him to make mistakes. Attack when he is vulnerable instead of waiting for him to attack us. The table erupted in debate. Some supported the idea. Others called it madness. Freya argued that risking their only shield-bearer was foolish when she could be protected behind walls. Corvus countered that walls would not save them if Malachar brought enough force to bear. Through it all, Aldrich remained silent, watching Seraphina with an expression she could not read. Finally, he raised his hand and the table fell silent. We will discuss strategy further. But first, there is another matter that requires attention. He looked at General Freya. Bring him in. Freya rose and left the hall. When she returned, she was not alone. 2 guards dragged a bound man between them. He was large, heavily muscled, with dark hair and darker eyes. His face was bruised, his lips split, but he held himself with the dignity of a warrior even in chains. Seraphina recognized him. Storm, one of the elite Northern Guard, one of Aldrich's most trusted warriors. She had sparred with him just days ago. He had been patient, encouraging, helping her improve her footwork and balance. Now he knelt before the table, a traitor exposed. Aldrich's voice was cold as winter itself. Storm has confessed to providing information to High Alpha Malachar for the past 5 years. Troop movements, defense positions, intelligence on our allies and enemies. The information he provided led directly to Captain Wren's capture. Wren was taken because Storm told Malachar about his mission. 17 Northern Wolves have died because of intelligence Storm provided. Seraphina felt her stomach turn. She had trusted this man, had laughed at his jokes and accepted his guidance. The deception cut deeper than she expected. Storm raised his head, and his eyes found Aldrich's. I did what I had to do, Lord Commander. Malachar holds my family, my mate, my children. He promised to kill them if I did not cooperate. Promised to make them suffer in ways I cannot speak of. And you believed him? I had no choice. What would you do if someone held a blade to the throats of everyone you loved? What would you sacrifice to keep them safe? The question hung in the air. Aldrich's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or memory of his own losses. What I would do is irrelevant. What matters is what you did. 17 wolves are dead because of your betrayal. Good men and women who trusted you. Captain Wren was captured, tortured for 3 weeks, and died bringing us information that you had already sold to the enemy. Storm lowered his head. I know, and I will accept whatever punishment you decree. But please, send someone for my family. Do not let them die for my sins. They are innocent in all of this. Aldrich was silent for a long moment. Your family will be retrieved. I give you my word as Lord Commander. But you will remain in custody until this conflict is resolved. If you survive to see the end, you will face judgment for your crimes. If you die in service to the Northern Territories, your family will be cared for and protected. He gestured to the guards. Take him away. As Storm was dragged from the hall, he turned his head toward Seraphina. Their eyes met, and she saw something there that surprised her. Hope. You are what he fears most. A shield-bearer beyond his control. A weapon that thinks for itself and chooses its own battles. Do not let him win. Do not let my betrayal be for nothing. Then he was gone, and the hall was silent again. Freya broke the silence first. I was wrong about her. She looked at Seraphina, and her gray eyes held a new respect. I thought she was a spy, a plant, another piece of Malakar's game. But she is something else entirely. She is what he never expected, a shield-bearer who thinks for herself, who refuses to be controlled, who chooses to fight instead of flee. She turned to Aldrich. We should follow her suggestion. Use her presence as bait. Force Malakar to overextend his forces, and when he does, we strike at his weakness. Aldrich nodded slowly. Prepare the defenses. Send word to Valorian and Selene. Double the guard on all approaches, and begin evacuation procedures for civilians who cannot fight. He looked at Seraphina, and something passed between them, an understanding, a bond forged in the fires of crisis. The ultimatum will arrive soon. When it does, we will have our answer ready. The ultimatum arrived 3 days later, carried by a raven with blood-red eyes and feathers black as midnight. Malakar's words were simple, direct, and utterly without compromise. Surrender the shield-bearer within 7 days, or face the destruction of everything you have built. This is not a threat. This is a promise. Your fortress will burn, your people will scatter, your legacy will be ash and memory. Choose wisely, Lord Commander. The fate of your people rests in your hands. Aldrich read the message aloud to the War Council. When he finished, he looked at Seraphina. The choice is yours. I will not force you to stay. I will not demand that you fight a battle that is not your own. If you want to run, I will give you supplies and an escort to the farthest reaches of the known world. I will ensure you are safe, even if it means losing this war. Seraphina stood. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. I will not run. I will not hide. I will not make the same mistakes that cost my mother her life. She trusted the wrong people, and it led to her death. But she also made a choice to fight for what she believed in, even knowing the risks. She looked around this table at the faces of warriors who had accepted her, trained her, begun to trust her. I am her daughter. I will honor her memory by standing against the man who murdered her. I will stand and fight, not because you ask it of me, but because it is the right thing to do, because these people deserve someone willing to stand between them and the darkness. She turned back to Aldrich, and her blood-colored eyes burned with determination. Tell Malakar he can go to hell. The shield-bearer stays. A cheer rose from the gathered wolves. Fists pounded the table. Voices called out in approval and support. Through it all, Aldrich simply smiled, a fierce, proud smile that made something warm bloom in Seraphina's chest. So be it. We prepare for war, 7 days. That was all the time they had. 7 days to prepare for a war that had been decades in the making. 7 days to fortify defenses, gather allies, and transform a military outpost into a fortress capable of withstanding the full might of Malakar's army. The fortress became a hive of activity from the moment the ultimatum was answered. Blacksmiths worked through the night forging weapons and armor. Engineers reinforced the walls and gates. Scouts ranged far and wide, tracking enemy movements and mapping escape routes in case the worst came to pass. Seraphina spent those days in a blur of training and preparation. Her sessions with Elder Corvus grew more intense, pushing her gift to its limits and beyond. She learned to create multiple shields simultaneously, to maintain barriers while moving, to shape her power into forms more complex than simple domes. The old healer drove her relentlessly, knowing that every ounce of skill she gained might mean the difference between victory and annihilation. Again, faster this time. Seraphina would grit her teeth and comply, summoning shield after shield until her body trembled with exhaustion and spots danced before her eyes. Then she would rest for an hour and begin again. By the 5th day, she could project a shield 30 feet in diameter and hold it for nearly an hour. By the 6th, she had learned to create barriers that were not merely defensive, but could be used as weapons, pushing outward with enough force to knock a grown wolf off his feet. She discovered she could shape the shields into different forms: walls, domes, spheres that could surround an enemy and trap them in place. Each new ability came at a cost, draining her reserves faster than simple barriers, but the versatility was worth the price. But it was not enough. She knew it was not enough. Malakar had an army. She was one woman with a gift she had only begun to understand. On the morning of the 7th day, Aldrich found her in the training yard before dawn. She had not slept, could not sleep. The weight of what was coming pressed down on her like a physical force. "You should rest." His voice was gentle, lacking the commanding edge she had grown accustomed to. "I cannot. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, the army marching toward us, the people who will die if I fail." Aldrich walked to where she stood and placed his hands on her shoulders. His grip was firm, grounding her in the present moment. "You will not fail, and even if you do, the failure will not be yours alone. We stand together, Seraphina. Whatever comes, we face it as one." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and given her purpose. In the pale light of early morning, the harsh lines of his face seemed softer, more human. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of responsibility that never fully left him. "Why did you take me in? That first day, when your guards brought me to the fortress. You could have turned me away, could have handed me over to Malachar and avoided this entire conflict." Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. "When I saw you standing alone against those rogues, surrounded by enemies with no hope of survival, I saw something I recognized. I saw strength. Not the strength of muscle or weapon, but something deeper. The strength to face impossible odds and refuse to surrender." His hands moved from her shoulders to cup her face, tilting it up toward his. "I took you in because you reminded me of who I used to be. Before the weight of command crushed the hope out of me. Before I learned to calculate every decision in terms of political advantage. You reminded me why I became a warrior in the first place, to protect those who could not protect themselves." Seraphina felt her heart racing. His face was so close to hers, his ice-blue eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "There is something else I should tell you, something I have been avoiding because I did not know how to say it." He took a deep breath. "When I lost Elira, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone, ruling the northern territories until age or battle claimed me. I had made peace with that, accepted it as my fate." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, feather light. "Then you appeared, fierce and frightened, and refusing to break no matter how hard the world tried to shatter you. And I felt something I thought I would never feel again." "Aldrich, I love you, Seraphina. Not because you are a shield-bearer, not because you are useful to my cause. I love you because you are the strongest person I have ever met, and being near you makes me want to be worthy of that strength." She did not know who moved first. Perhaps they both did. But suddenly his lips were on hers, and she was kissing him with a desperation born of fear and longing and the knowledge that tomorrow might never come. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Aldrich rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens today, I want you to know that you are not alone. You have never been alone, not since the moment I found you in that forest." Seraphina felt tears streaming down her face. Happy tears, terrified tears, she was not sure which. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since you caught me when I fell, since you looked at me and saw something other than a curse. Then let us survive this day, and when it is over, when Malachar is defeated and his army scattered, we will have time to build something together, a life, a future, everything that was stolen from us." He kissed her again, softer this time. A promise rather than a farewell. "But first we have a war to win." The scouts spotted Malachar's army at midday. They came from the south, a dark tide of wolves and men that stretched across the horizon like a living shadow, thousands of them, far more than the intelligence had suggested. Seraphina stood on the fortress walls beside Aldrich, watching the enemy approach. Her stomach churned with fear, but she kept her face calm. The warriors around her needed to see strength. They needed to believe that victory was possible, even when the odds seemed impossible. "More than we expected." General Freya's voice was grim. "I count at least 3,000 wolves, plus several hundred humans armed with modern weapons, rifles, explosives, things that could tear through our defenses if we let them get close." Aldrich's jaw tightened. "Then we do not let them get close. Signal the archers, prepare the first line of defense, and send word to Valorian. If he is coming, now would be the time." Freya nodded and hurried away to relay the orders. Below, the fortress gates stood closed and barred. Behind those gates, 300 of the Northern Guard waited in formation, ready to defend their home. 300 against 3,000, the mathematics of slaughter. But they were not alone. Other allies had answered Aldrich's call. High Alpha Valorian had sent 200 warriors from the eastern reaches, battle-hardened veterans who had been fighting Malachar's expansion for years. High Alpha Selene, after much deliberation, had committed 100 of her coastal fighters to the cause. 600 defenders against 3,000 attackers. Better odds than before, but still overwhelming. Seraphina felt the power stirring in her chest, responding to her fear, ready to be called forth. She had trained for this moment, had pushed herself beyond every limit she thought she had. But standing here, watching the enemy army spread across the valley like a plague, she wondered if anything she had done would be enough. Malakar's forces halted just beyond bow range. For a long moment, nothing moved. The two armies stared at each other across the killing ground, waiting. Then a single figure stepped forward from the enemy lines. He was tall, even from this distance. Silver hair caught the afternoon light, and dark robes billowed around him in the wind. High Alpha Malakar, the architect of her suffering, walking toward the fortress with the casual confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He stopped halfway between the armies and raised his voice. Some trick of the wind or magic carried his words clearly to everyone on the walls. "Lord Commander Aldrich, I have come for what is mine. Surrender the shield-bearer, and I will spare your people, your fortress, your precious northern territories. Continue this foolish resistance, and everything you have built will burn." Aldrich stepped to the edge of the wall, his voice carrying just as clearly. "She is not yours, Malakar. She is not anyone's. She is a person, not a possession, and she has chosen to stand against you." Malakar laughed. It was a cold sound, utterly without warmth or humor. Chosen. You think she had a choice? Everything that has happened to her, everything she has experienced was part of my design. I shaped her from birth. I controlled every aspect of her miserable existence. She is my creation, Aldrich, my weapon, and I will have her back. Seraphina felt rage building in her chest, hot and sharp. She stepped forward, letting Malakar see her clearly for the first time. "I am not your creation. I am not your weapon. I am Seraphina, daughter of Isolde Dawnkeeper, and I stand against everything you represent." Malakar's eyes found hers, and something shifted in his expression, something that might have been surprise, or perhaps satisfaction. "Isolde's daughter speaks. Good. I was hoping you would find your voice before the end." He spread his arms wide, addressing not just the fortress but the entire battlefield. "Let me tell you a story, little shield-bearer. A story about your precious mother. A story about truth and power and the price of defiance." His voice dropped, becoming almost intimate despite the distance. "Your mother was remarkable. The most powerful shield-bearer I had ever seen. She could have changed the course of history, could have protected our kind from the extinction that awaits us if we do not act. But she was weak, sentimental. She believed in coexistence with humans, in hiding and hoping they would never find us." He began to pace, his dark robes swirling around him. "I tried to convince her, tried to make her see reason. When persuasion failed, I tried other methods, threats, promises. I even offered to make her my Luna, to share power with her as equals. She refused everything." Malakar stopped pacing and looked directly at Seraphina. "So I killed her." The words hit her like physical blows. "I waited until she trusted me completely, until she believed I was her ally and protector. Then I had my assassins take her while she slept. I told you she died a hero. I told the whole pack she died defending our borders. And I kept you, her precious daughter, as payment for the trouble she had caused me." Seraphina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had known, intellectually, that Malakar was responsible for her mother's death. But hearing him confess it so casually, so proudly, was something else entirely. "You raised me in misery. You made my life a constant torment. Why?" "Because suffering builds strength. Because I needed you broken before I could rebuild you in my image. I needed you to believe you were worthless, so that when I finally revealed your power, you would be grateful, loyal, dependent on my approval." He smiled, and the expression was terrible. "I miscalculated, obviously. I did not expect you to awaken your gift so early, or to find your way to such a powerful protector. But it does not matter. You will still serve my purpose. Willingly or not, you will shield my army as we march against humanity. You will protect us from their weapons and watch as we reduce their civilization to ashes." Seraphina felt power surging through her, responding to her rage. Her hands were glowing, threads of light dancing beneath her skin. "I would rather die." "That can be arranged, but not before you serve your purpose." Malakar raised his hand, and behind him his army began to move. "Kill them all. But bring me the shield-bearer alive. I do not care how many of you die in the process. I want her standing before me by nightfall." The battle began. Arrows rained down from the fortress walls, cutting into the advancing enemy. Wolves fell, screaming, but more took their places. The sheer mass of the enemy army was terrifying to behold, a living wave of violence rolling toward the fortress like a tide of destruction. The human soldiers raised their rifles and returned fire, bullets sparking off stone and finding flesh. The crack of gunfire echoed across the valley, a sound foreign and terrible to wolves who had lived their lives far from human civilization. Seraphina acted on instinct. She threw her hands forward and poured everything she had into a massive barrier that stretched across the front of the fortress walls. Bullets struck it and stopped dead, falling to the ground like harmless pebbles. Arrows from the enemy archers shattered against its surface. The defenders cheered, renewed hope surging through their ranks. For a moment, it seemed as if one woman could hold back an entire army. "Hold the line!" Aldrich's voice rang out over the chaos. "Do not let them reach the gates." The first wave of attackers broke against the fortress defenses, like water against rock. Warriors poured down from the walls to meet them, swords clashing, claws tearing. The air filled with the sounds of battle, screams and howls, and the thunder of gunfire. Seraphina maintained her shield, feeling the energy drain from her with every impact. She had trained for this, had pushed herself to the limits of her endurance. But the assault was relentless, wave after wave of enemies throwing themselves against her barrier. The rogues were savage, their humanity stripped away by years without pack bonds. They threw themselves at the barrier with no regard for their own lives, clawing and biting at the shimmering surface. The human soldiers were more disciplined, firing in coordinated volleys, testing different sections of the shield for weaknesses. She was tiring. She could feel it. The warmth in her chest was fading, replaced by a cold emptiness that spread through her limbs. Sweat poured down her face. Her muscles trembled. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown to collapse. 1 hour, then 2. The battle raged without pause, neither side willing to retreat. Bodies piled up on both sides of the walls. The ground ran red with blood. The smell of death hung heavy in the air, mixing with smoke from fires that had broken out in the outer buildings. Aldrich fought at the front lines, his sword cutting through enemies with brutal efficiency. He was a whirlwind of violence, decades of training and experience guiding every strike. She watched him from her position on the walls, terrified every time he disappeared into the chaos, relieved every time he emerged again. General Freya commanded the eastern wall, her silver hair stained with blood, her voice hoarse from shouting orders. Valorian's warriors held the western approach, their eastern fighting style creating confusion among rogues who had never faced such techniques. But even the greatest warrior could not fight forever. Even the strongest defender would eventually fall. And the enemy kept coming, endless waves crashing against their defenses. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Malachar made his move. He walked through his own army, untouched by the chaos around him, until he stood at the base of the fortress walls. His dark eyes found Aldrich in the melee, and his voice cut through the noise of battle. "Lord Commander, I tire of this slaughter. Let us end it the old way. Single combat, you against me, winner takes all." The fighting paused. Both armies pulled back, leaving a clear space between them. Aldrich stepped forward, breathing hard, covered in blood that was both his own and his enemies. "You would submit to the old laws? You, who have broken every oath and tradition our people hold sacred? I would see you dead by my own hand. The method matters little." Aldrich looked at Seraphina, and something passed between them. Understanding, fear, love. "If I win, your army retreats. You surrender yourself to judgment, and Seraphina goes free, forever beyond your reach." Malachar smiled. "Agreed. And if I win, I take the shield bearer, your fortress, your territories, everything. Then we have a bargain." Aldrich walked out through the gates to meet his enemy. Seraphina wanted to scream, to beg him not to go, to throw herself between them and damn the consequences. But she understood. This was the only way. A single combat would save hundreds of lives on both sides, would give meaning to the deaths that had already occurred. She could only watch as the two most powerful wolves she had ever known circled each other in the fading light. The warriors on both sides fell silent. This was ancient tradition, older than the Covenant, older than the territorial divisions that shaped their world. Single combat between champions, a way to settle disputes without the wholesale slaughter of armies. Malachar moved first. He was faster than his age suggested, his attacks precise and deadly. Despite his silver hair and the decades that showed in his face, he moved with the fluid grace of a much younger wolf. His blades sang through the air, each strike aimed at vital points. Aldrich met him blow for blow, years of training and experience guiding his blade. He had been fighting since before Seraphina was born, had survived battles that lesser wolves would not have lived through. His style was different from Malakar's, more defensive, waiting for openings rather than creating them. They fought in silence, the only sounds the clash of steel and the grunts of exertion. Neither gave ground. Neither showed weakness. The watching armies held their breath, knowing that the outcome of this duel would determine the fate of thousands. But Seraphina could see what others could not. She could see Aldrich tiring, could see the wounds he had taken during the battle slowing him down, a gash on his arm that had not fully closed, a bruise on his ribs that made him wince with each breath. Could see Malakar, fresh and uninjured, pressing his advantage with growing confidence. A cut opened on Aldrich's arm, then another on his leg. He stumbled, just slightly, and Malakar pressed forward with renewed ferocity. "You are old, Lord Commander. Old and tired and fighting for a cause you cannot win. Did you really think you could stand against me?" Aldrich did not answer. He simply kept fighting, kept defending, kept refusing to fall. But it was not enough. Malakar's blade found an opening, driving deep into Aldrich's side. The Lord Commander staggered, blood pouring from the wound. He fell to one knee, his sword dropping from nerveless fingers. Malakar stood over him, his own blade raised for the killing blow. "This is how it ends, Aldrich. Not with glory, not with honor. Just an old man bleeding out in the dirt while everything he loved burns around him." Seraphina did not think, did not plan, did not consider the consequences. She simply acted. Power exploded from her, more than she had ever channeled before. A shield formed around Aldrich, deflecting Malakar's killing stroke. The blade bounced off the barrier with a sound like a bell, and Malakar stumbled backward in shock. "You dare? This is single combat, sacred law. You break faith with everything our people believe." Seraphina walked through the gates, her body glowing with power, her blood-colored eyes blazing with fury. "You speak of faith? You who murdered my mother while she slept? You who tortured me for 18 years? You who would drag our entire species into a war of extinction?" She raised her hands, and shields formed around her, layer upon layer, building into something massive and terrible. "I break no faith with murderers. I follow no law that protects monsters like you. I am a shield-bearer. My purpose is to protect the innocent, to stand between the vulnerable and those who would harm them." She looked at Aldrich, bleeding on the ground but still alive. "And I choose who I protect." Malakar's face twisted with rage. "Then you will die with him. All of you will die." He turned to his army. "Attack! Kill everyone! Burn it all to the ground!" The enemy surged forward, thousands of wolves and men charging toward the fortress. Bullets filled the air, arrows darkened the sky. Seraphina stood in their path and did the impossible. She created a shield that covered the entire fortress. The barrier spread from her outstretched hands like ripples in a pond, growing larger and larger until it formed a dome that encompassed the walls, the gates, the buildings, everyone inside. It was massive, impossible, the largest shield that had been created in over 100 years. Bullets struck it and fell away. Arrows shattered against its surface. Wolves crashed into it at full speed and bounced back, stunned. Inside the barrier, the defenders stared in awe. Outside, the attackers raged impotently against a wall they could not breach. Seraphina felt power flowing out of her, like blood from an open wound. She was burning through reserves she did not have, drawing on strength that should have been impossible. Every second drained her further. Every heartbeat brought her closer to collapse. But she held. General Freya was the first to understand. "The secondary gates. While she holds them, we can flank their army, cut off their retreat." Aldrich struggled to his feet, one hand pressed against his wounded side. "Do it. Take everyone who can still fight. End this." The fortress gates opened, and 600 warriors poured out, circling around the edges of the barrier to strike the enemy from behind. Caught between an impenetrable shield and a counter-attacking force, Malakar's army began to crumble. Wolves threw down their weapons and fled. Human soldiers surrendered in droves. The unified force that had seemed so overwhelming scattered into chaos. Malakar himself stood alone before the barrier, watching his plans fall apart. "This is not possible. You should not be this strong. No shield bearer in history has ever created a barrier this size. Seraphina's voice was strained, each word costing her precious energy. My mother could have. If you had not killed her, if you had not spent your life destroying everything that threatened your power. She took a step forward, and the barrier moved with her, pushing Malachar back. She was more powerful than you ever knew, and I am her daughter. Malachar's face twisted with a mixture of fear and rage. You cannot maintain this forever. You will exhaust yourself, and when you fall, I will be waiting. Then come and wait. Seraphina pushed harder, the barrier pressing against Malachar, forcing him backward step by step. He fought against it, throwing his weight against the shield, but it was like trying to push back the tide. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of battle fading. The enemy army was broken, scattered. Those who had not fled or surrendered were being cut down by the Northern Guard and their allies. It was over. They had won. But the price of victory was higher than anyone knew. Seraphina felt her strength finally give out. The massive shield flickered, wavered, and collapsed. She fell to her knees, darkness eating at the edges of her vision. Malachar saw his chance. He lunged forward, blade raised, ready to strike her down in her moment of weakness. He never reached her. Aldrich appeared between them, moving faster than a wounded man should have been able to move. His sword met Malachar's, turned it aside, and then drove forward into the High Alpha's chest. Malachar stared down at the blade piercing his heart, then up at Aldrich's face. You? This changes nothing. Others will rise. Others will see the truth. Humanity will destroy us all. Perhaps, but not today, and not by your hand. Aldrich twisted the blade and pulled it free. Malachar crumpled to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. His last words were barely a whisper. You do not understand. The humans are coming. They already know we exist. Everything I did, everything, was to save us. Then he was gone, and the battlefield fell silent. Seraphina tried to stand, but her body refused to cooperate. The world was spinning, darkness closing in from all sides. She felt arms catch her as she fell, heard voices calling her name from very far away. Then there was nothing but blackness and the distant sound of her own heartbeat. She woke 3 days later in a bed softer than anything she had ever known. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, filling the room with warmth. She could hear birds singing outside and the distant sounds of people going about their lives, normal sounds, peaceful sounds, the sounds of a world that had not ended, despite everything that had threatened to destroy it. The room itself was unfamiliar, large and well-appointed, with thick furs on the floor and tapestries on the walls depicting scenes from Northern history. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and fresh flowers sat on a table by the window. For a moment she did not remember where she was or what had happened. Then it all came rushing back, and she tried to sit up. Gently. Aldrich sat in a chair beside her bed, dark circles under his eyes, bandages visible beneath his shirt. He looked like he had not slept in days. He looked exhausted. He looked beautiful. You have been unconscious for 3 days. Elder Corvus was not sure you would wake up. He said you burned through more energy than any shield bearer in recorded history. He said it should have killed you. The battle, Malachar, did we? We won. Malachar is dead. His army is scattered. Those who survived have either surrendered or fled to the far corners of the territories. He took her hand in his grip gentle but firm. You saved us. That shield you created, it should have been impossible. Corvus says there is no record of any shield bearer ever creating a barrier that size. I did not think, I just acted. I know, I saw. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. You broke the rules of single combat to save my life. You violated sacred law. Some on the council are calling for your punishment. Seraphina felt a chill run through her. And what do you say? Aldrich smiled, and it transformed his face, erasing years of worry and pain. I say that any law that demands I die while you watch is a law worth breaking. I say that you did what any true protector would do. I say that if the council wants to punish you, they will have to go through me first. He leaned closer, his ice-blue eyes holding hers. I also say that I love you, that I want you by my side, not as a weapon or a tool, but as my partner, my equal, my Luna. Seraphina felt tears streaming down her face. I thought you were going to die. When Malachar stabbed you, when you fell. I know. I thought so too. But then I saw you walking through those gates, glowing like a star come to earth, and I knew I had to survive, had to live long enough to see what you would become. He cupped her face in his hands. Will you have me, Seraphina? Will you stand beside me and help me build something worth protecting? Will you be my Luna, my mate, my partner in everything? She answered him with a kiss. The mating ceremony took place 2 weeks later, under the full moon, with representatives from every allied territory in attendance. The Great Hall had been transformed for the occasion. Thousands of candles lined the walls, their flames reflecting off polished stone and creating a warm golden glow. Flowers from the mountain meadows filled every corner, their sweet fragrance mixing with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Seraphina wore a gown of white and silver that seemed to glow in the moonlight. The fabric had been woven by the finest craftswomen in the Northern Territories, threaded with actual silver that caught and reflected every source of light. Her white hair was adorned with crystals that scattered the candlelight into tiny rainbows. For the first time in her life, she did not feel cursed or wrong. She felt beautiful. The guests who filled the hall represented nearly every major power in the Wolf Territories. High Alpha Valorian stood with his Eastern warriors, their formal attire a stark contrast to the battle gear they had worn just weeks before. High Alpha Selene had traveled from the coastal Dominion, her sea-green eyes watching the proceedings with quiet approval. Even representatives from packs that had stayed neutral during the conflict had come, eager to witness the union that would reshape the political landscape. Aldrich stood waiting for her at the ceremonial altar, dressed in the formal attire of the Lord Commander, black and silver, the colors of the Northern Territories, with his family crest embroidered over his heart. He watched her approach with an expression of pure wonder, as if he could not quite believe she was real. The ceremony was ancient, filled with words and rituals that had been passed down through generations. Elder Corvus performed the binding, his aged voice steady and clear as he spoke the sacred vows. But Seraphina barely heard them. All she could see was Aldrich. All she could feel was the bond forming between them, stronger than any shield she had ever created. When he marked her neck, claiming her as his mate before the moon goddess and all witnesses, the crowd erupted in celebration. Howls echoed through the territory, hundreds of voices raised in a sound of joy and new beginnings that could be heard for miles. Later that night, as they stood together on the balcony of their chambers, watching the celebration continue below, Aldrich spoke quietly. Malachar said something before he died, about humans already knowing we exist, about everything he did being to save us. Seraphina leaned against him, drawing comfort from his warmth. Do you believe him? I believe he believed it. Whether it was true or simply the delusion of a madman, I do not know. But we should be cautious, increase our security, strengthen our alliances, prepare for possibilities we may not be able to imagine. Always the commander, always, but also now a mate, a partner. Perhaps someday a father. Seraphina smiled. Someday. But for now, let us enjoy what we have built. Let us remember that we survived against impossible odds, that we found each other in the darkness and created something beautiful. Aldrich kissed the top of her head. I love you, Seraphina. Luna of the Northern Territories, shield-bearer, protector, my heart. I love you too, Aldrich, Lord Commander, warrior, my home. They stood together as the moon rose higher, two broken people who had found wholeness in each other, ready to face whatever the future might bring. 1 year later, a young Omega arrived at the Northern Fortress. She had been cast out from her pack for showing signs of an unusual gift. Her eyes were tinged with gold, and sometimes, when she was frightened, things around her would move without being touched. Her pack had called her possessed, dangerous, wrong. Luna Seraphina met her at the gates. The young Omega looked up at the woman before her, taking in the white hair, the pale skin, the blood-colored eyes, taking in the confidence, the strength, the complete absence of shame. They said you would understand. They said you were like me once. Seraphina smiled and took the girl's hand. I was exactly like you, cast out, alone, convinced that I was broken beyond repair. She led the girl through the gates, into the warmth and safety of the fortress. I was wrong. So were the people who hurt me. And so are the people who hurt you. They walked through corridors filled with wolves who nodded respectfully as they passed. Warriors, healers, scholars, children, all of them part of something larger than themselves, all of them home. I spent 18 years believing I was cursed, that my appearance, my differences, made me worthless. It took nearly dying to discover that the things that made me different were the things that made me strong. She stopped and turned to face the young Omega. Your gift is not a curse. It is a part of who you are. And with training, with patience, with the support of people who believe in you, it can become something extraordinary. The girl's eyes filled with tears. But what if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough? Seraphina knelt down, bringing her face level with the girl's. Then you try again, and again, and again, until you succeed. That is what strength truly is. Not the absence of failure, but the refusal to let failure be the end. She stood and gestured toward the training yards, where warriors practiced their craft under the watchful eyes of their instructors. I will teach you, not because you owe me anything, but because someone should have taught me. Because every young wolf who feels broken and alone deserves to know that they are not. The girl looked at her with something like hope dawning in her gold-tinged eyes. Why? Why would you help me when you do not even know my name? Because I remember what it was like to have no one. Because I know the darkness you are feeling, and I know there is light on the other side. Because the moon goddess gave me the power to protect, and I choose to use that power for those who need it most. Seraphina smiled, and in that smile was everything she had learned, everything she had survived, everything she had become. My mother died protecting the idea that our kind could be more than weapons or tools, that we could choose our own paths, forge our own destinies, be more than what others tried to make us. She placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. I carry on her work, not through violence or conquest, but through compassion, through teaching, through showing every lost and broken soul that they have value, that they matter, that someone sees them. The young Omega straightened her spine, some of the fear leaving her eyes. I want to learn. I want to be strong like you. Then welcome home. Seraphina led her toward the training yards, toward the beginning of a new story, toward a future neither of them could yet imagine. Behind them, the fortress stood strong and proud, a beacon of hope in a world that often forgot what hope looked like. Within its walls, hundreds of wolves lived and worked and loved, building something that would outlast them all. And at the heart of it all, Luna Seraphina continued her work, training the gifted, protecting the vulnerable, standing as a shield between the innocent and those who would harm them. She had been rejected, abandoned, cursed. She had become something far greater than anyone who hurt her could have imagined. She had become home. The end.